You are utterly mistaken regarding time. You likely believe you comprehend it by observing a timepiece or sensing your own aging. However, that sensation isn't time itself. It's merely a biological illusion, a cognitive trick. The prevalent notion many hold is that time resembles a flowing river, carrying them from the past through the present and into the future. You perceive it as a moving entity. But here's the flaw in that picturesque analogy. If time were a river, at what velocity would it flow? 1 second per second. This statement is devoid of meaning, akin to declaring a table is 1 table long. It offers no insight into the fundamental nature of existence. The reality is far more peculiar, more mechanistic, and frankly, less poetic than a moving current. Time does not flow. It does not propel you forward. And if you suppose you grasp how time functions merely by being able to mentally enumerate seconds, you are in for a significant disillusionment. Let us begin with the workings of your mind, as that is the origin of the confusion. You assume your internal chronometer is a dependable instrument, but it is not. It is a chaotic jumble of interpretive mechanisms. Consider a straightforward exercise. Attempt to mentally count 60 seconds. Simply sit there and count. 1, 2, 3. You believe you are tracking time, but in actuality, you are executing a highly specific, intensely personal program. Some individuals, as they count, hear an inner voice, literally speaking to themselves, subvocalizing 1, 2, 3. If someone interrupts you and requests you speak, you lose your count. The mechanism falters. However, others, and this is where it becomes truly fascinating, do not perceive an auditory voice. Instead, they visualize images. They might envision a measuring tape with numbers progressing like a ticker tape, clink, clink, clink. If you employ this visual tape measure system, you can actually read a newspaper or consult a grocery list while mentally counting time. You can sort your socks, examine the fabric's weave, and still maintain a perfect tally on your mental tape. Yet, the individual who counts with an inner voice cannot read a word without losing track of the temporal progression. This reveals something fundamental. What you perceive as the passage of time is simply a cognitive construct, a pattern-matching game your brain engages in. It varies dramatically from person to person. It is not a universal constant, but rather a biological hallucination. Therefore, when we discuss physics and the cosmos, we must set aside your subjective experience. We must cease focusing on how it feels and instead concentrate on what it actually is. In physics, we must be operational. This means we do not inquire about the intrinsic nature of time, which is a philosophical pursuit reserved for those who enjoy debating over coffee. Instead, we ask how we measure it, and the answer is almost disappointingly straightforward. Time is merely a method for ordering events. That is all. It is a system of notation. Imagine you have a deck of playing cards. You arrange them in a line. You can then state that the jack precedes the queen, and the king follows the queen. The cards themselves are not moving. The table is not flowing. The order is simply a structural characteristic of their arrangement. Time functions as the table, and events are the cards. When we say time passes, we are simply reading the cards from left to right. This brings us to the most common misconception. You conceive of time as a container, envisioning the universe as a vast, empty room with a clock on the wall ticking away, even if the room is devoid of content. You believe that if we were to remove all celestial bodies, all planets, all atoms, and all light, time would continue its inexorable tick, tick, tick. This is incorrect. This represents the Newtonian perspective, which is now obsolete. Time is not a backdrop, it is a measure of change. If absolutely nothing within the universe undergoes alteration, no atomic vibrations, no light propagation, no energy transformation, then time ceases to exist. You cannot define a second without a physical phenomenon to mark it, such as a swinging pendulum, a resonating quartz crystal, or an oscillating cesium atom. Time is not distinct from the constituents of the universe, it is a property of those constituents. This is where your ingrained intuition rebels. You might assert, but surely time influences things. Time causes me to age. Time makes milk spoil. No, it does not. This is a linguistic fallacy. Time is not an active agent. It possesses no hands with which to reach into the refrigerator and spoil your milk. Bacteria do that. Chemical reactions do that. Entropy does that. Time is merely the systematic record we employ to track the rate at which these processes occur. To attribute an action to time is akin to saying that inches constructed the house. Inches did not construct anything. They merely indicate the dimensions of the walls. Time is the measuring instrument, not the constructor. Let us extend this measuring instrument analogy further, as this is where things become truly peculiar. If time is merely a ruler used to gauge the interval between occurrences, what transpires if the ruler itself is adaptable? This is not hypothetical, it is a quantifiable reality. We once presumed that a second was a second universally. If you possessed a clock on Earth and another on Mars, they would tick in perfect synchrony. This notion feels intuitive and correct, yet it is entirely false. The rate at which clocks tick is contingent upon their location and velocity. This is not a malfunction of the clock, but a fundamental characteristic of reality. Imagine yourself driving a car across an immense, flat expanse of paper. You can travel either northward or eastward. If you proceed purely northward, you achieve maximum progress in that direction. However, if you adjust your steering and begin moving northeast, you are dividing your speed. You are progressing somewhat northward and somewhat eastward. You are no longer advancing northward as rapidly as before, because a portion of your momentum has been diverted eastward. Now substitute time for north and space for east. This is the essence of relativity. You are perpetually moving through the universe at a constant velocity, but this motion is partitioned between space and time. When you remain completely stationary in your seat, you are dedicating all your motion to traversing time. You are advancing into the future at the maximum rate, 1 second per second. However, the moment you stand and walk, or embark on a journey in a spacecraft, you are diverting some of that motion into spatial movement. As you traverse space, you must, by mathematical necessity, move more slowly through time. Your clock decelerates. Your aging process slows. You are not breaking a mechanism, you are merely altering your trajectory on the map. If you were capable of moving at the speed of light, the universe's ultimate speed limit, you would allocate 100% of your motion to space, leaving no residual motion for time. For a photon of light, time does not elapse. It is both generated and absorbed within the same instant from its own frame of reference. The universe is, in its perspective, static. You might now be contemplating, but I don't feel my watch slowing down when I run to catch a bus. Of course not. Your velocity is far too modest. You are, in essence, a biological snail. The effects are imperceptible at human speeds, but they are undeniably real. We must incorporate this mathematical principle into the programming of our satellites. Satellites move at considerable speeds. Consequently, their temporal progression differs from yours. We must actively adjust their clock rates. There is another temporal phenomenon that deceives us, which brings us back to the sock-sorting conundrum, the concept of pattern recognition. We perceive time as possessing a direction, an arrow. The past is immutable, while the future remains open. You can recall your breakfast, but you cannot recall your dinner. Why is this? If the equations of physics operate in both forward and reverse directions, as most of them do, why can't we recall the future? If you were to film a planet orbiting a star and play the footage in reverse, it would appear perfectly consistent, adhering to all gravitational laws. However, if you filmed an egg falling to the floor and shattering, and then played it backward, everyone would recognize it as fabricated. The yellow yolk would not leap from the floor, reassemble into a spherical form, and encapsulate itself within its shell. Herein lies the secret. This is not about time itself, but about probability, about disorder. It is infinitely easier to break an egg than to assemble one. There are a myriad of ways an egg can be broken, scattered here, splattered there, its shell fractured into 3 pieces, or into 1,000 fragments. Conversely, there is only one precise configuration in which the egg remains intact. Thus, as entities and phenomena move and interact, they naturally transition from an ordered state, characterized by limited possibilities, to a disordered state, offering numerous possibilities. We refer to this as entropy, and it is the sole reason you perceive a temporal direction. You are observing the universe shuffling a deck of cards. You began with a perfectly ordered deck, and with each passing second, the universe shuffles it incrementally. You cannot unshuffle the deck merely by wishing it so. This implies that your sensation of time's flow is, in reality, your brain registering the increasing disarray within the universe. You are, in effect, a disorder detector. When you differentiate between the past and the future, you are, in essence, distinguishing between a less disordered state and a more disordered state. If the universe were in a state of maximal disorder, maximum entropy, where everything was uniformly dispersed and nothing of interest was occurring, your brain would be incapable of discerning the past from the future. There would be no egg to break, no memory to form. In a universe at thermal equilibrium, the arrow of time would vanish. Let us revisit those individuals counting in their minds, those who visualized the measuring tape versus those who heard the voice. Both are attempting to impose a rigid, linear framework upon a universe that is, in fact, far more fluid. We construct these mental models, these counting mechanisms, out of necessity for survival. We need to ascertain when a predator approaches or when the harvest is ready. We have evolved to track duration, but we have not evolved to comprehend the dimension of time itself. Our brains are optimized for efficiency, not precision. We focus on the present moment because that is where we exist. However, in the realm of physics, the now is an exceedingly elusive concept. If you and I are standing adjacent to each other, our now is effectively identical. But if you are on a planet a million light-years away and begin moving away from me, your interpretation of now slices through the universe at a different angle than mine. What you consider to be occurring at this moment might reside in my future. What I consider to be occurring at this moment might reside in your past. There is no universal now that encompasses the entire cosmos like a blanket. The universe is a composite of events, a four-dimensional continuum. How you section this continuum depends on your velocity. This is difficult to internalize. It feels contrary to our instincts. It feels as though I am suggesting that up is down. However, this discomfort arises because you are attempting to translate the complex language of the universe into the rudimentary language of your biology, endeavoring to count socks when you ought to be measuring light beams. When you attempt to force the universe to conform to your intuition, you encounter confusion and paradoxes. But when you relinquish your preconceptions about time, when you cease attempting to count it like a pile of laundry and instead measure it as a dimension analogous to space, the equations suddenly align and the universe begins to make sense. Our exploration is not yet complete, for even if we concede that time is a dimension that stretches and compresses with velocity, a more profound question lies at the root of this inquiry. We have discussed measuring time and the temporal arrow of disorder, but we have not addressed its origin. If time is a measure of change, what transpires when we rewind the cosmic movie to its initial frame? If the universe is expanding and we reverse this process, it contracts, becoming progressively smaller and hotter. Eventually, we reach a point where the very laws of physics begin to disintegrate. You see, all our timekeeping devices, our atoms, our planets, our beams of light, they exist within the universe. But if the universe itself originated in an event we term the Big Bang, does it hold any meaning to inquire about what preceded it? This serves as the ultimate test of your revised definition of time. If time is merely a framework for ordering events within the universe, then asking what existed before the universe might be as nonsensical as asking what lies north of the North Pole. While grammatically coherent, it is geometrically absurd. There is no direction north of the North Pole. Consequently, there may be no temporal existence prior to the inception of time. Yet that persistent internal feeling, that internal counter, that voice counting 1, 2, 3, continues to resonate. We possess a deep-seated desire for the universe to have a preceding narrative, for a timeline that extends infinitely backward. It is challenging to accept that the measuring tape might simply commence, that the counting mechanism had an activation switch. This creates a fundamental dissonance between our psychology and our cosmology. We are finite beings striving to comprehend the infinite by employing instruments fashioned from biological matter and electrical impulses. It is remarkable that we comprehend anything at all. Consider the patterns once more. The individual who visualized the measuring tape internally could perform an action the voice counter could not. They could read and count concurrently. This capability stemmed from parallel processing power, attributed to their distinct internal imagery. Physics bestows a similar power upon us. When you cease translating the universe into rivers and flows and begin perceiving it as geometry, as mathematics, as structure, you acquire a superpower. You can comprehend how black holes arrest time's progression. You can understand how gravity is merely the distortion of the spatial fabric. You transition from being a victim of the illusion to becoming an interpreter of the map. Nevertheless, humility remains essential. We have discussed how we store information, vessel functions, exponentials, electric fields. We learn these sophisticated terms, transcribe these symbols, and believe we have encapsulated reality. But recall, the individual beside you might be storing that identical vessel function using a fundamentally different internal visualization. They might perceive a resonating drumhead, while you envision a curvilinear trace. We are all like sightless individuals attempting to grasp an elephant, each sharing their interpretation with others using communication methods we ourselves only partially comprehend. The mathematical endeavors we undertake are invariably acts of interpretation. Our investigations revealed that even the straightforward act of counting to 60 seconds is vulnerable to a multitude of external influences and internal processes. If our perception of a mere 1 minute proves so precarious, consider the profound instability inherent in our concepts of eternity or beginnings. We pose the question of the universe's genesis, anticipating a narrative akin to once upon a time. However, the cosmos does not operate through storytelling. It functions through states, through fields, and through mechanisms that may transcend any notion of a prior existence. We are attempting to catalogue the universe's minutiae, as if it were adorned with socks. Yet the universe is not adorned. It is the very weaver of its own existence. So what then is time? Time is the phenomenon that prevents all occurrences from unfolding simultaneously. Time represents the inevitable eventual demise of the cosmos, a state of thermal equilibrium awaiting its arrival. Time is the distortion of space brought about by the presence of matter. But paramountly, time serves as a reflection, revealing the inherent constraints of our own minds. When you observe a timepiece, you are not witnessing time itself. You are observing a contrivance engineered to provide solace, a mechanism to regulate our communal existence. Actual time, the physical construct, is a ferocious, unrestrained entity that shifts its pace, decelerates in proximity to black holes, and may not even possess a unidirectional flow. If this revelation causes discomfort, that is a positive sign. It signifies that the framework of our current understanding is faltering, that you are beginning to perceive the fissures in our accepted reality. Embrace this bewilderment. Within the scientific pursuit, confusion is not an impasse, but rather the genesis of discovery. It signals the imminent abandonment of a comforting falsehood in favor of a challenging verity. Time is far removed from your current conception. Its true nature is vastly more profound. And the very fact that we, small biological mechanisms composed of cosmic dust and existential unease, can begin to comprehend this, that is the most magnificent marvel of all.